When are we meeting?
All right, good afternoon. It is special city council meeting, 5 p.m. on Thursday, January 11th. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Desiree, you want to do a quick roll call?
Yes,
Sorry.
of course. Councilmember Campson.
Here.
Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Anderson.
Here.
Councilmember Ward.
Here.
Councilmember Bogosian.
Here.
Councilmember Hahn.
Here.
Councilmember Myers.
Here.
Councilmember Carroll.
Here.
Mayor Pounds.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. And just a reminder for council, since we are sharing mics, just be sure you're on it so the live stream can pick it up. First item is citizens' comments.
We have Mr. Klaus signed up to speak. And we're going to try to put a timer on the TV, as MASC suggested. So Amy, if you want to give me the...
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good, very good. Al Klaus, 3 Grand Pavilion, meeting number 28 since 4/13 of 22. We have 4 new ears, 4 new eyes, and 2 new mouths. Our only request is you use them freely. Alphabetically, Mrs. Campson and Mrs. Carroll, welcome to City Council 2024. Requesting for the 20th time to provide us written assurances regarding enforcement of Section 925 BC. Amplify music from Sweetgrass has resulted into a nuisance which is being perpetrated by the city as a result of not enforcing the ordinance. Requesting for the 4th time to enforce Section 925 I-12 nuisance. We have requested in writing the city issue a cease and desist order to the Sweetgrass Inn as a result of Sweetgrass's egregious noise violations over the past 3 years. At this time, our city has demonstrated they do not have the will to do the right thing, rescuing the residents from the empire. All this seriously jeopardizing my Matt Foley motivational speaking certification. Mayor Phil's October the 31st, 23 email attached with Klaus's response states, quote, I try to meet regularly with them, that would be Mrs. Heck and Mr. Nolan, who is the resort manager, to be certain we stay aligned, unquote. Mr. Nolan, quote, totally understands the delicate balance between the resort, the residents, the club members, city, and the broader community. Mayor Phil, respectfully, based on our numerous experiences, which are nuisances with the empire, your comments are classical political rhetoric, and that last word was edited by my wife. We believe the empire's sense of alignment pushes their agenda way beyond the tipping point, all at the expense of the residents. We can only conclude you are condoning their behavior. You are part of the situation. Respectfully, Mayor Phil, your sense of alignment is driving us right into the ditch. Please take off your blinders. Sweetgrass's event center is approximately 4 acres. November the 5th, a Sunday night, an event was staged on the south edge, the very south edge of their property, 25 feet from Mrs. Williamson, 62 feet from the Klauses. Called IOP police at 9:13 p.m. Subsequently, on November 15th, a Wednesday night, the Empire held another event in the same location. Called IOP police 3 times. Last one at 11:21 p.m. Last we knew, the resort was trying to talk their way out of a citation. These events demonstrate a small sampling of the taunting and bullying we have been experiencing the past 3 years. Thank you.
Pretty good, Al.
Desiree, is that it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Thank you. Next item is special presentations. We don't have any. I would like to have a point of order and make a motion that we move item 6E up to discussion first.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. So 6E is discussion of workshop format and potential changes. As residents here and council can see, we're trying a little bit different just based on some feedback around the seating arrangement. Come down and make it a little more casual from an interaction standpoint. Also, we will attempt to have fewer more items on the agenda so we can take a deeper dive if we need to on certain subjects or topics. I've been fairly intent on making sure nothing new got on the city council agenda that didn't come through workshop, which created a decent amount of redundancy. Good intentions, but a lot of redundancy. So procurement items, budgeted items, we'll take those straight to council, because I think we had a few of those tonight that we're just going to take straight to the council meeting. So those are some of the changes we'll put in place. We'll keep tweaking these workshops as we have them and make any other changes you all recommend. Any comments or thoughts or other ideas? Yes, ma'am.
Are we talking?
Mike?
Thank you. Are we talking about wording of the ordinance now, or just discussion? Because I was,
There's no ordinance.
oh, there isn't, okay.
No.
I was just gonna say, we should definitely keep the flexibility to go back on the days if it's, especially if it's a hot topic where we can't fit too many people and enough people in the room, but that's about the only thing now. And a place for someone making comments during our discussion, are we gonna allow that?
No.
Okay,
Nothing's changing other than where we're sitting and what's going to happen on the agenda.
okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
So I've always been uncomfortable with this workshop. And the main problem I have with it is that we don't take any votes. And I think anytime that council meets, there should be the opportunity that if something comes up, that we should be able to take a vote. I sorely miss having a Ways and Means Committee meeting in detail, not just a financial report, but open discussion about a lot of things that are on people's minds that is kind of just brushed over in the workshop. I appreciate you trying to condense it and get rid of some of the redundancy, but I think the workshop itself is redundant because we turn around and we go through pretty much the same stuff except for the changes that you mentioned in the full council meeting. But with the main problem I have is having no vote, and I'd like to see the bring back to Ways and Means Committee meeting.
But I think to that response, tonight we're taking a little bit deeper dive on the financial statements. So we'll see how that goes.
I think informally, we've been discussing maybe having a deeper dive in our finances, maybe quarterly or something like that.
And tonight's one of them.
One of them, okay.
Elizabeth?
I would agree with Councilmember Ward. I miss Ways and Means as a citizen and now as a council member. I would very much like to see, perhaps maybe not monthly, but at least quarterly, a really deep dive into that. I think the workshop materialized when the committees were eliminated, and so it was necessary to, it wasn't redundant really, because all of the work was being done within the workshop format among all 9 of you or us or whatever. But now that we've reinstituted the committees, I think a lot of that, most of that work needs to bubble up through those committees. And the issues with property or administration or procurement or public safety would then come through that with some robust, one would hope, discussion moving on to a council meeting. And I agree with Jimmy about the Ways and Means, kind of bringing that back. And maybe then if that was quarterly, maybe every other month we're diving into those issues that you were talking about that need a lot more focus and a lot more comprehensive kind of teamwork to come up with an answer.
I mean, could we do that though in the workshop? I mean, is that kind of what we're heading toward with the workshop? Like today is basically Ways and Means. Is this? Am I? I mean,
at some
this is
level.
kind of like
Yeah.
the way Ways and Means was, and that I kind of agree with Councilman Ward too on the voting. I mean, I don't necessarily know that. I like the idea of being able to talk about things, sometimes twice if necessary and not vote. But I also do. I mean, I know there was one instance last year where we had to make an exception to vote during, and we're all here, and so that we don't have to call, if there is something that needs to be voted on. I mean, I know we can make an exception, but I feel like it might make more sense to make that a little bit less cumbersome. But
I recall back when city council began discussing a different setup and instituting the workshop, that one of the concerns that we were hearing was frustration with not fully being immersed in a lot of the projects, and either the updates were redundant, we were doing it at the committee, at Ways and Means, and then at council, or sometimes issues would get to council after a specific committee worked on it for several months, and by the time it got to council, maybe some council members didn't feel like they had an opportunity to chime in at the beginning stages of that issue and maybe help steer the direction potentially a different way. So I think that that was another big thing that I recall hearing from council about using the workshop structure as an opportunity for those discussions, and then deciding, okay, there is a directional, some direction from council on this issue, committee, take it to a different level, and then bring it back. So I recall that being also part of the goal of the workshop, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah,
Go ahead, John. Yeah.
yeah, my memories of how we got to where we are is we had a full, historically, we've had full committees that brought everything to council. And part of the problem with that structure is that unless you went back and reviewed every single committee meeting on video, you really didn't have a good understanding of the issue when you got to council, when you were taking a vote on it. So it was very difficult to stay abreast of all the discussions going on these issues. So the reason that we went all the way away from committee meetings and said, look, we want to bring everything to a workshop to have full council review these things prior to going to a vote. And that's why there was really no vote at a workshop, because we wanted to kick it around, talk about it, discuss it, make sure we were fully, had an opportunity to ask questions and get everything out and get a full understanding of any issue before we came and voted. I think we said, okay, maybe that was too far. There are a lot of issues that need to maybe go through a committee, so we brought back a condensed committee. And now, still, I think, though, those committees on major issues should be bringing things to a workshop for full council to wrestle before going to a vote. I don't think the intent is to repeat every single issue. I think that's what the mayor said, that we're not going to repeat everything in a workshop and then go to council. I think only those key issues that really need full council's attention, this gives an opportunity for us to discuss, debate, and come to full understanding of the item before we do vote on it. So I think I'm fine with the way that it's structured, that the way we're going to. I think it does maybe on some basis need more of a deep dive into the financials, this element of that Ways and Means had, and I think that, if we do that on a quarterly basis, I think we should give it a shot.
Scott?
I agree with Councilmember Ward on Ways and Means reviews as well. I don't know about as far as reinstating a full-blown committee, but I think earmarking certain times in every part of the workshop for the financial dive, and it does sound like we're all kind of coalescing around at least once a quarter we go into a much deeper dive. I would like to preserve not having the vote during a workshop. And the reason is that if we're talking about now taking much fewer issues and going deeper into them and working them, I think a lot of the ones that we've already touched upon in some of the workshops, we always have follow-ups, we have questions, we have more information that might be required. And sometimes we're hearing about the issue at the workshop for the first time. So I'd rather preserve the workshop for actually working on the issues and then having the vote at council meetings. If we have a special situation, then maybe we can address it, but I'd like to kind of keep the guiding principle of not having the votes at the workshop.
I just to remind, the Ways and Means Committee included the financial statements, which we have in the workshop, and also any approval of procurement items, budgeted or unbudgeted, and they would be presented, and
Which then went to council again.
which then would go to council. I guess what we did last year, we included all of those items in the workshop. There was no action, but it was understood that those items, again, would be placed on a council agenda for approval. And I think one of the suggestions I made, if it's budgeted, and we discussed it at length during the budget process, maybe that just goes straight to council unless there's anything that's unbudgeted, and we would need a bigger, maybe a broader conversation before council approved it. And those would come at the workshop, not at the council meeting for the first time, expecting an action of council. So that could be an option.
Would it be helpful to, I know a few years ago, a lot of the folks that are up here now haven't seen what the old Ways and Means packets looked like. They were much more detailed, much more meaty. They had departmental spending. They had a bunch of other information in there that I think are beyond what we have right now, weren't they? So maybe it would be helpful for us at one of the meetings to look at what some of the old packages had in there, because there was a lot more, I don't know if it's necessarily more transparent, but there was more information that was shared in the packets. Doesn't mean we have to go into all of it, but at least it's all there if somebody wanted to dive into it.
Yeah.
So maybe it would be helpful to get one of the older packets distributed.
And we can certainly do it.
I know they're
We
pretty
included full financial statements every month, and we were asked not to because it made the packets really large.
Huge, yeah.
And that's part,
Yeah.
and we've always said they're available if you want them, we can email them directly, and I guess that's what we've been doing. We can bring them back, send them separately, but we do run those reports monthly anyway. As council changes, people want different things. I think it's great information for us to know the level of detail you all want to be provided, and we certainly will.
Yeah, and a new year is just a good time to pause and revisit where we are and what we're doing, so good conversation. And what about, want to be sensitive to residents and council members that are working or have other responsibilities? Is start time good, bad, or indifferent for folks?
5 o'clock? Yeah, 5's great for me.
I often have a hard time with 5, but
Earlier would be better, or later would be better?
later.
Later.
But, I mean, 5:30 would be,
Helpful.
a lot of times things start at 5. Other things.
Other, yeah. Anybody else?
5:30 would work, yeah, that works.
Yeah, and again,
5.
want to be sensitive to staff as well, too.
Oh,
so-
yeah,
that's-
yeah, true.
Okay, well, let's take
I
all
mean,
this.
I've been
Go ahead.
making it work. The problem I have is when we have something else that gets put in front of it, and then it becomes 4:30.
Yeah,
And that becomes much more.
yeah, like an
difficult.
executive session we've done a couple of
Right.
times, yep.
Right.
Okay.
Is there a way that we now have executive session before our meetings? Could we
Sometimes,
possibly
yeah.
consider putting executive session at the end of the meeting?
Which is where it's been forever. So
I know, and it-
sometimes it just lends itself to, instead of having to fill the room up, empty the room out, bring it back in, it's
Yeah.
easier from a flow standpoint,
yeah, I
from a
understand.
resident view. so.
And we would typically schedule executive sessions unless it's an emergency. We'll typically schedule them for the day of the council meeting, which starts at 6. So maybe having the executive session at 5:30 would still be convenient for most.
Yeah.
And we would still schedule it that way to be convenient for folks that come in and are in the room already.
Yeah. There. All right, we'll keep,
I mean, if I'm the only one that has a problem with 5, I can make it work.
all right.
They do let 13-year-olds take Uber now, so.
Do they really?
Yeah.
Scary. All right, good conversation. We'll keep tweaking as we move forward on this. Thank you for your input. Item 4, dashboard of city operations and short-term rental report. Desiree, you want to run through this?
Yes, so the dashboard in your packet is for December 2023. I'll start with vacancies. Revenues and expenses, we'll take a deeper dive when we get to that section of the agenda. Personnel vacancies, we have 3 police officers and 3 paramedics and 1 firefighter position. We do have 3 candidates that are going through the interview process and the review process in the police department, so we're hopeful that those will be successful. And we do have, I believe, a recruit for the firefighter position. We do not have any active applications for paramedics. We believe that with the new changes to the wages that were approved in December, that we will be able to attract more candidates. Upcoming community events for this month, we are closed on Mondays. It's not it is a celebration of the Martin Luther King Day. Monday, January 15th. I did want to add that the city will host, the Recreation Department will host a native plant workshop on Tuesday, January 16th. This is an initiative that was recommended by the Environmental Advisory Committee. They have partnered with a native plant expert who will be teaching folks about the benefits of using native plants in their landscaping and the benefits to the environment overall. So we hope to make it a session or a series of classes if they are well attended, which we anticipate they will. Police department charges, we are tracking ahead of prior years on several of the charges, traffic being the most, as you can see, pretty significant uptick compared to prior years. Other charges were tracking pretty much flat and consistent with years prior, with the exception of livability. As you can see, we've tried to increase our focus on livability ordinances by adding additional staffing. We are fully staffed in the code enforcement department there, and we are seeing that in the charges that are being taken. Calls for service in the police department as well as in the fire department have gone up compared to years, prior years. In the fire department, we had 123 calls in the month of December, and those were split between 66 to calls that were responded to non-residents and 57 resident calls. So non-resident calls, even in the off-season, are higher than those for residents. Of the 123 calls for service, they responded to 3 fires and 34 EMS calls. The number of cases in our municipal court continue to go. You can see they're higher than past years, both 2022 and 2021. We had about 150 cases go through the municipal court last month. Public Works, garbage and yard debris, pretty flat compared to prior years, as well as the recreation department registrations. We did see a slight decline in December registrations. Talked to Carrie about what could be driving that, and we'll look at it a little bit closer, which may be just a matter of a new class that they started doing registrations in 2022, December 2022, that they didn't do this year. I know there were some changes in the classes. They're trying new things, and maybe the classes in 2022 did not translate in the same month in 2023. And then last that I want to highlight in the building department, here we can see the difference in this current calendar year compared to 2021 and 2022 with the number of homes that are permitted. So we're seeing construction activity start to become a little bit stagnant. We anticipated some of that impact in the budget, but I think we don't know yet, but we may not meet budget even with our conservative assumptions when we were forecasting revenues there. Short-term rental license by year, as of December, we had 1,868 short-term rental licenses issued, and I think the second page includes a little bit more detail on that. We only had 2 more licenses compared to November. Now we are at 1,868, 9 pending licenses. Those folks have applied but have not yet paid, so don't have a license, and for a total of 1,877 licenses. Any questions?
Jan?
Do we have a way of knowing how many of those licenses are active licenses?
Our monitoring software, Rentalscape, can show us how many of the revenue generated by those licenses. So we can drill down and understand how many of those licenses are actively generating revenue, which means they are being actively booked.
Okay, that would,
Would you like to see that for next month?
not on a monthly basis, but maybe an annual or quarterly or something like that.
Okay. We'll do it for next month, and we can get feedback on the formatting or any additional information we'd like to see.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Departmental reports are in your packet. Any specific questions or comments while we have department heads here? Desiree, anything else?
No, no, sir.
Thank you. Next item, 6A, livability, discussion of community enrichment plan and development of task force to develop recommendations to address livability and tourism management. You recall, this has been going for a number of months. The first step was the community survey that went out early fall, I think it was last year. We had just under 750 responses, which is great on that. So next step will be to form this task force, if you will, and kind of what we're looking for there is a couple of representatives from the business community, maybe a restaurant owner, property management owner, 6 to 7 residents, process thinkers, demonstrated IOP, community service, cross-section of the island, Wild Dunes, middle of the island, south part of the island, full-time, part-time, condo dwellers, single-family home dwellers, so like to have a good mix of all of that. An environmental conservation representative, and then some city staff, and staff would most likely be made up of a public safety representative, public works representative, rec department, and then general government, most likely the STR coordinator. So that's a dozen-ish people, give or take. Would like to have this committee ready to vote on at the end of January council meeting so that they can start meeting in February. So I know Desiree had sent out an email with kind of those specifications that we're looking for from a committee makeup standpoint. So over the next week or so before we get to council meeting, if you have recommendations that you would like to submit for that particular task force, that would be great. Desiree, anything to add to that? So good
No, sir.
response on the survey so far. So I think we're off to a good start. David, our consultant, will be here on the 23rd to go through those results of that survey, which council has seen pieces, parts of it, but for residents' purposes, they'll be able to see the results of that. Scott?
Could you just send us, could you send around the list that you just talked about with the list of the people for qualifications?
yep.
Yeah, that way, if we have any
Desiree, do you mind, 'cause that was an
recommendations.
email you sent out a few weeks ago, if you don't mind, just
Resending that.
recirculating, please. Ashley, sorry.
Sorry, is that, submitting recommendations to Desiree?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah,
Just
for vote at council, yep.
Okay. So that will be shared with everybody, like who always submit? Okay.
I think the goal is to have a diverse group and for council to discuss a makeup that, hopefully will yield good discussion and good, represents the community at large. David McNair has indicated that, sometimes we try to keep groups pretty concise so that they're manageable, but he has experience managing larger groups. So if it ends up being a little bit more than what we had articulated, I don't think that would be a deal breaker for him, and certainly something that he could manage. Certainly, we don't want it to be too large, but I think just right. We'll just have to find what just right is.
So it's up to us to shake the trees and find people that are willing to serve
Yep.
in that capacity.
Yep.
And then at the next the council meeting, we will discuss each person, or?
I think you all could send it to me. I can prepare one document that shows potential folks that are willing to serve. I think that's going to be the key. I have a few people in mind that I think would be lovely, but whether or not they can take the time to attend meetings. I mean, this is going to be a specific topic issue, so that's good. But certainly would encourage you all to have conversations with your neighbors and people that that have expressed an interest or would bring a particular expertise to the group that we think would be great, and whether or not they would be willing to serve.
Well, for anybody watching, is it okay if you kind of go back and summarize maybe what are we going to be asking them to do? How long are we going to be asking them to do it? What's the frequency? How long are they going to be meeting? What's the expected output, objective? I mean, I think that would be helpful for all of us to kind of refresh.
A lot of those details will be agreed upon by the committee when they meet. David and I have had conversations about having this group really steer next steps. We've talked about listening sessions and focus groups to maybe drill down in some of the issues that were asked about in the community survey. But rather than being prescriptive from our end, the group should agree on how often to meet. It'll depend on their availability, and it'll depend on their feedback on the community survey and how much more information do they think they need to be able to get to recommendations. So a lot of those details about specific objectives will be discussed with the group, being led by David.
We need a little more direction than that, I
Yeah, I
think.
mean, I
Well,
think
he's
you're
coming on the 23rd,
Yeah,
and
okay,
we'll have
and the
some of
goal was to part of it is to discuss this
okay, well then we
next
won't be
step.
able, we won't be able to select the committee on the 23rd if we haven't
I
specified.
think council has enough information to put forth at least a list. I mean, I think what'll come out on the 23rd would be, to Scott's point, is this a 3 to 4 month exercise? Possibly, maybe a couple of meetings a month at best or worst, depending on your view. David's gonna be leading a lot of this effort
Okay.
for the committee. So, I mean, again, we can build a list, and then people can hear more about it on the 23rd, and we can become more educated on the 23rd, and if somebody needs to pop off, they can pop off.
Okay, but I guess, I'm just gonna say it out loud, this is not about short-term rentals, correct? This is
Not
about,
in any way.
okay, and that's what we're trying to clarify, I think. It's about goals and objectives for the city going forward, what our priorities are. Is that
Around tourism management.
around tourism management? Okay. That,
Yeah,
that,
this-
I think is enough for now, yeah.
Yeah,
Livability and tourism
Yeah.
management
Right,
is what
that's what it says.
Okay.
But this is a temporary, this
Absolutely.
isn't like the environmental advisory committee
No,
that's
I mean,
gonna be around for.
Again, I think best guess to y'all's questions, I mean, I would see this being a 3 to 4 month exercise, most likely. And again, there will probably some focus groups, probably some, small town meeting, listening sessions type things. But again, David would be
It's information
facilitating.
gathering and information gathering,
Yes.
facilitating, ideation,
Absolutely.
that kind of.
Yeah, I mean, this committee is not gonna have to do that kind of lifting. That's really David's role for us. Scott, does that help?
Yeah, no, it helps. Yeah. Thank you.
Next item B, environmental discussion of establishing an ad hoc committee of council to address beach restoration and preservation policies. Desiree, you want to kind of set this up, tee this up?
I'll give it a shot.
Do it.
So obviously, we're all aware of the issues that we have been dealing with, particularly on the south end of the island. And it became apparent to us that contrary to the structure and the system that we've had for the past maybe 20 years on the north end of the island, where we've done a couple projects and there is already a structure on not only on policy and short-term and long-term planning, but also a fee structure around funding beach renourishment and beach restoration projects. It feels like everywhere else on the island that we have not had to do a project because we hadn't experienced significant erosion, which we are now. We are sort of limping along a little bit. We are obviously relying on the expertise and the advice of our coastal engineers. We are dealing with an emergency situation, and I do want to separate what we're dealing with now, which is an emergency, which we are limited in what we can and cannot do, to what more of a long-term strategy looks like for the city. And it seems to me that it would be a good exercise to, rather than talk about this project or this issue along with every other issue that we have, to really separate it and give it the attention that it deserves. And I think it is one of these issues that lends itself to invite participation from folks that are experiencing it directly, Front Beach homeowners, folks that don't live Front Beach but maybe live, behind in the middle of the island and certainly do have an interest in beach preservation as well, but help guide a conversation about long-term strategies on beach restoration. And if there are any things that the city has not talked about, has not discussed, has not considered, that maybe we should. And also from a funding perspective, right? I mean, I think we need to talk about the structure that we've had for the past 20 years with Wild Dunes and how do we mimic that somewhere else on, in other places of the island, because there is clearly a public and a private interest associated with beach restoration and beach preservation. And it seems to me that the city has had to, because of the emergency situation that we've had, really taking the primary role. From a practical perspective, I think it would help in improving the communication between the city and those residents. With Wild Dunes, we have a group, the Community Association, that really serves as essentially a steering committee, if you will. When you think about projects and gathering funding, and they've had the opportunity and the ability to create funding mechanisms to supplement the funding from the city. And it creates an organized structure for communication, for dissemination, and for, developing future strategy. We don't have that anywhere else on the island. What else?
I mean, I think to Desiree's point, I think we've just had to pivot from a scenario where this end of the island has been pretty well self-tending, and we haven't had to do a ton of work on the island this end. Just really right after a storm, we would have somebody scrape up a temporary berm. It would be paid for generally by FEMA or the state. That's kind of been it. So this is we're definitely in new territory on this end, and I don't think we believe it's going to go anywhere. I mean, our experts are telling us, hey, we need to consider a midterm shoal management project. As you all know, we have this Army Corps project that's about to start. We are doing sand exploration for long-term projects. So whether we've gone from kind of not needing to do anything on that end, I think we now see ourselves in a position where we need to do a lot, probably on that end.
And I think the timing, gives us an opportunity, an interesting opportunity, because last year, as you'll recall, we engaged Seaman Whiteside to guide the city through a sea level rise adaptation plan. And obviously, a big portion of that is the beach and beach restoration, and how sea level rise and is impacting our beach. And we are already gathering a lot of experts and a lot of stakeholders that will help, from a technical perspective, provide a lot of information to us and maybe answer some of the policy questions that we're getting, and I'm sure you all are getting, about, is there anything the city could be doing or could allow us to do to protect our property, or to do it differently than what we have been doing in the past? And I think it gives us an opportunity to with the residents, with a group of people that have an interest and have a background on the issue, to help us determine whether or not are there any policy considerations that we haven't thought about, that have worked in other places that may work here. And I think they should be fed information by this technical group that is already going to be doing a lot of this research, and can help provide that technical expertise to those discussions. So I think it could go hand in hand with that, but it is a big enough issue, I think, that it could lend itself to a working group of residents, city council. Obviously, ultimately, this, from a policy perspective, city council makes those decisions, but give people a seat at the table to be able to be part of the conversation and be part of the development of recommendations for you all, and to adopt, and for the city staff to implement.
And I think, real quick, to Scott, to your question about the other committee structure, this is a short-term ad hoc committee, maybe 3 council members, some number would be on that, residents, obviously, for a short-term deep dive. John, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I fully support doing this because a couple reasons. I guess in general, I think we ought to be cautious on setting up ad hoc committees. I mean, that's partly why we're elected, especially when it comes to policy. But this is, I think, a really special instance here. I think it's existential to me, what we're seeing on our beaches. I think we need to relook at our policies and make sure we have current or robust policies to protect the beaches and the dunes that we have, the property on the beach, and how it's going to be funded. I think this committee is going to have to reach out beyond the city. I think the other Barry Island communities along in South Carolina, I think we're going to have to join together in some way, because in what I'm seeing is that there's state statutes in place that really need to be changed, and I think we need to reach out and lobby to get some of those statutes changed. I think, as many know, the policy of OCRM was changed a couple of years ago from a retreat to a protect policy, but it appears that many of the underlying policies have not changed yet, and the behavior by OCRM is more of still in a retreat mode as opposed to a protect. So I think it's going to have to dive deep into the policy, how we change the policy, how we get a current, robust system in place to be able to protect our barrier island, especially in light of the fact that we are seeing more and more instances of higher tides, sea level rise, et cetera. So I do think it's existential for us to do this. I think it's important to be council-led, so strong council presence, and with the community, and then bring experts in as needed. I think it's also important that they manage the current crisis situation that's going out there, and how we're addressing it, what we're doing about it, till we can get the renourishment project going in the next couple months. So I do support it, and I do believe also that some residents have volunteered, so we should look at those volunteers to be placed on the committee.
Elizabeth?
I would agree with everything that John said, and I was curious, Desiree, when you mentioned the sea level rise assistance that the city received, that was the engineering firm. I mean, I think as needed with some other people is going to be throughout the process, and in my mind, that's regulatory and legal, because what I don't want to have happen is we form a committee and what the heck was that? And we get to the end of the road and everybody's happy and we think we have a plan, and then some regulatory agency or lawyer says, well, yeah, that is nice, but you can't do that. So I mean, we need all hands on deck to figure out every available avenue, because I don't, if a door closes on one of them, we need to be able to pivot and find what we can do, and to John's point, do it as quickly as possible, because this is I'm very concerned that we're now entering a cycle of extreme erosion down there, and if we don't get a plan together to hold that off, I mean, it's disappearing quickly.
Scott?
Yeah, and isn't this a little bit twofold, I think, to what we're talking about with this committee, changing potential policy or getting a long-term strategy and policy in place is key, but we do have a tactical issue and situation that we need to address. And, I don't know if we're going to be talking about maybe revisiting our current ordinance that we have in place for what residents and we can do to, do some protection between now and when the Corps of Engineers gets here. And I do, is it true that the Corps of Engineer project might be delayed a little bit? Or are we getting into the February, March, April, or March timeframe?
The opening of bids was scheduled for December 19th, and, I'm sorry?
It was the 29th.
I'm sorry, the 29th, and was moved to just January 17.
Yeah. And I don't want to, my point being that I think we got tactical emergency situation that maybe if there's more we can do now, that hopefully that committee will address that as well quickly. And then we've got the longer term solution when we're looking at policy, getting the state engaged and finding sources of funding for the long-term protection.
Jan?
I would like to request one thing on this committee, and that is please have our experts there to advise the committee. We have too many committees that don't have expert advisors, and I think we just spin our wheels a lot with that. The second thing is, to the experts that have come before council and advised us are fabulous, and I would hope they would be available to educate anyone on the committee so that everyone's up to speed, because I think it's a lot of people didn't realize they needed to know about this until it was almost too late.
Drawing straws.
I think we're all on board, yeah.
Is there any, I know there's some discussion about the members of
From
council.
council standpoint, Yeah.
of who would like to be in that committee, and, once we select that, we can have a discussion about the residents and the experts, regulatory, legal, technical, from, beach restoration, coastal engineers and all that. I think it would be
Attorneys,
helpful
yeah.
to start giving this group a little bit of shape as quickly as we can.
Well, and John, to your point too, a lot of us are members of the South Carolina Beach Advocates. That's kind of the one spot where all the beach communities are engaged and organized to a large extent, and have had some success from a lobbying effort. So I think we need to leverage that group pretty hard.
Yeah.
I'll just throw something out from a council standpoint, just to start the conversation, because I think, there is an environmental aspect to this. So I think, Katie, you're the liaison to the Environmental Advisory Committee. So I think that would be a critical spot to have somebody participate on. I would suggest 3 council members, and again, just for start of a conversation, to your point of putting some structure around it, I would say Katie, Scott, and myself. And if somebody else has desire, great. So react to that.
That's the south middle and north end of the island too, so we got it covered.
Good point.
I mean, if you decide you want 4, I'm happy to serve.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's from more of an ordinance-driven, legal mindset, policy issue, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I think that's a
that'd be
great,
good.
I think that's a great group.
And then to John's point also, I know we've had probably 2 residents already raise their hand. And if we want some diversity, we're gonna need somebody out of the Wild Dunes world to do that.
I think a resident that maybe not necessarily lives on Front Beach would be good too. It gives a different perspective, I think. Still interested on the beach, but maybe not seeing the.
Perhaps ask the Wild Dunes Community Association to nominate someone for the committee?
We can ask them about folks along
I
beach.
think the Wild Dunes should be someone that lives on Beachwood.
Like Beachwood East area.
No.
And then another, if you want another community member, then that'd be in addition to the Beachwood East resident.
Someone from the resort? Are we gonna have them particularly? No, okay.
Yeah, we can, but Scott, were you gonna say something?
No, I just had a name in mind. I can maybe,
Okay.
instead of saying it on live TV. I don't want to volunteer them.
Are they in the room,
No,
Scott?
but they're in Wild Dunes.
No.
Voluntold.
No.
Now, to Elizabeth's point, for these meetings, I mean, will we have legal counsel? Because I feel like a lot of this is going to be,
You need it.
Yeah, I think you're gonna pull city attorney in, I think you're gonna pull CSE in, I think you're gonna pull beach I think whenever we need somebody, we pull them.
Yeah.
Because I think we've got the right people around the table with us. But to your point, they would absolutely have to be actively involved in this conversation, particularly Mac, or somebody in the
Maybe
firm.
not in the first meeting.
No, yeah, yeah, a
Trying to,
couple of dollars an hour.
couple
you
of
don't wanna-
dollars
yeah,
that we would
yeah.
save, but
after people come up with lots of ideas.
Yeah.
yes,
he
I
can-
think once.
Yeah, start filtering.
Yeah.
Quick question, I
Yep.
guess.
Definitely.
I know,
If
it's
you'd
way
been over
there.
here, you would have this
Yeah.
mic.
Excellent point.
Thank you.
I think it was Scott who made the point about kind of having a policy change potentially enacted before the Army Corps project is here. So in other words, very quick action, knowing that it's there's kind of a myriad of issues there. Public hearings, 2 readings, to do all that in short order. I don't know that could get done if it was gonna be steered by a committee that hadn't been formed yet. So I don't know if there's an
Take
interest.
that off track and do it, or, just do this. If we're going to entertain something like that, then I agree with you.
It almost
We don't
would
want
need
to
to
bog it
be-
down with a timeline. We'd want to do something quickly. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think if the goal was to get something enacted quickly, then we would want those 2 issues to be separated at this point. But
And go ahead, Doug.
either way, I think it's gonna be close. A policy change would be hitting the books fairly closely to a project getting enacted, so, either way, it may not make an enormous difference, but if you wanted to fast track that, I would
So
say you'd want
Yeah, and
to separate it out.
Just to be clarify, when you're talking about a policy change, are you in
City
particularly
policy.
talking about 5-4-15B?
I don't know the
Which
section
is
number.
the-
Hard erosion control?
Paragraph
Well,
2.
it's hard erosion, it's the perimeter, 250-foot
Yes.
perimeter,
Yeah,
restriction.
that's kind of the obvious, yeah.
Yeah.
But, so Douglas, remind me, October, November meeting, we relaxed one of the city ordinances, right?
Right.
And is that this
That
one?
is the same one,
Yeah.
correct.
And did we have anybody take us up on
No.
that? So we didn't have anybody take advantage of a relaxed ordinance?
Correct.
So would we relax that one further? I mean, is that,
Well, we relaxed, did we
Suggestion.
just relax it to put sandbags? Is that what we did?
Correct.
yeah,
Temporary
yeah,
sandbags.
Yeah.
We kind of mirrored OCRM's policy in their jurisdiction, in our jurisdiction.
right,
So
I
this
think-
would be,
right.
Yeah, I think that's what the discussion is. I think it's not only relaxed, the question even, and we can relax it further if that's the choice of council, but I think the question is whether it's outdated at this point in light of a protect policy by OCRM.
Yeah, well, I agree, but that's a longer term.
That's a longer term
conversation.
one, that's right.
If we're looking for something quick,
All I'm suggesting is in light of what's going on, and if our timeline with the Army Corps project is a little bit longer, is there anything that we can do to help mitigate further deterioration, not only at the south end of the island, but up at Beechwood East? Is there anything creative in the ordinance that we could relax that would give residents even more ability to temporarily or whatever to protect property?
so just kind of an off-the-cuff answer is that the city can only relax those provisions that are
City.
landward of the state's line. All of Beechwood East is seaward of the line, so you can't really do anything for Beechwood East. Their line would have come as far seaward as the kind of most recent episode has come. So you're really talking about relaxing between the most recent erosion line and landward. So from my perspective, that could be some folks who didn't get impacted quite as much at the December 12th, December 17th, I'm sorry, all the dates. The December 17th episode that got very close to some houses. So I think there's a pretty narrow window that, you could be impactful in between now and that Army Corps project, but there is a window.
And our ordinance is still relaxed. And so if anybody wanted to take advantage of sandbags, or are we not doing this, or is that not? So
It
that's
is
a
still
thing?
relaxed, but nobody has taken advantage of that. So I
But I mean,
think
they
kind of,
could at any moment decide,
right.
yeah,
okay, I didn't think I wanted them, but now I
that's
do
correct.
want to bring in my own. Or-
In a certain spot, to
Okay.
Douglas's point, yeah.
Correct.
And just to put specificity around what you're saying, so in addition to sandbags, maybe we're saying riprap becomes okay, but in that
Outside of
narrow-
the states,
a narrow spot, yeah,
Correct.
anywhere the city has
You can't?
oversight. Huh?
And that has been the challenge. I think Douglas mentioned it, that, we have jurisdiction up to one point, and then OCRM has their own definitions of not only where the setback and the setback line is, but what they are claiming as being under their jurisdiction after an event of what they define as active beach. So whatever we do has to be in coordination or, within the bounds of what the state tells us we can or cannot do. So we're restricted by that, and I don't know if people fully understand that. But we're restricted in what we can do to what we're authorized and essentially, and funding as well.
Yeah, well, and regardless of whether it's outdated or makes sense or not, it is what it is, current world, yep.
So can I suggest that when this ad hoc committee gets put together, is there a person, an OCRM, a human being?
We
that
know a
could-
couple human beings.
That could actually attend a meeting and explain all of this to the committee and the general public, because I think that would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, just a level set.
Yeah.
This feels a little bit like the wave dissipation thing that what was going on in Wild Dunes that, I mean, that's effectively, I mean, it's not riprap, but it was a harder structure that we.
It didn't work.
Yeah, and then we ended
There's a
up,
new
I mean, that we
technology
were
that-
told, because I think, wasn't it on private property? And then they told them, look, you gotta take that out of there? I mean, we've kind of trod this ground
They got an exception from OCR
That was-
to do it for
But it dug out
experimentally.
Behind the
Do
thing.
you
It-
mind?
it-
Yeah.
Dug out behind the,
Right,
the
Yeah.
thing worse than it would have if they'd done
Yeah.
nothing.
which I think is their rationale behind not wanting hard structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, Katie, to your point, a level set for council, residents, whomever, because it's complicated.
Very complicated.
One other comment. Do you feel like you and the engineers have enough resources, funding, what have you, to do as much protection as humanly possible, I guess, between now and the time that the core project starts? Or do you feel like you need anything else that we need to be considering in the next meetings or two?
So far, because the state approved $850,000 towards these efforts, that frees up a lot of the money that the city council had approved. So just as a reminder, city council approved $250,000 for the installation of sandbags on Breach Inlet. Those sandbags were installed, they were buried, they had to be dug out, they're gone. The city approved $300,000 for the installation of sandbags at Beechwood East. We're using a different strategy, a different sandbag. Those bags are started to be installed today. City Council also approved an amount not to exceed $1,250,000 for a combination of emergency scraping and trucking in sand with a goal of placing up to 50,000 cubic yards of sand. All of that sand was placed before the storm with a combination of scraping and trucking in. Of that amount, we have about $800,000 left because we have received money from the state. So if the goal is for the city to, I guess the approval was not to exceed $1,250,000, then we can continue down that path because the grant opens up funding from that which would have been expended otherwise. So if taking into consideration the grant, we do have money available. So the city would not be paying more than the approved 1.25. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It's just, I just want
So
to make
we
sure.
have-
Yeah, so the plans are in place to do everything we can to protect between now and.
Yes, we are getting direction from our coastal engineer in the most efficient way and the quickest way that we can bring protection to this area. Our goal is, we have another storm coming tomorrow. The dune that was reestablished after the December 17th storm was not completely gone after the storm we had on Tuesday. So that is good news. After tomorrow, we will reassess and determine if emergency conditions still exist and the quickest way to bring protection to those properties and reevaluate how much sand we can supplement from the scraping by trucking in sand. Trucking in sand is a very expensive and time-consuming endeavor. So we are being advised that scraping is the quickest way that we can get protection to these homes that are severely impacted. But now, after the dune is reestablished, we will evaluate how much sand we can then truck in to supplement the sand that's being recycled from the scraping.
Jimmy?
Keep hearing this word protection of these properties, and I'd like to get some clarification about what is meant by that specifically. What type of protection?
Well, the city is addressing issues where the properties are in an emergency condition, and that means that they are within 20 feet of the erosion area.
Right. What are these specific protections? What are they made of?
We are just building a dune.
That's all.
That is all.
That's the only things on the table.
Yes, sir.
Right.
I know in North Carolina, a lot of their inlets, they're allowed to dredge. They dredge out, I mean, like that huge sand that used to be attached to our beach that's now sitting in the middle of Breach Inlet. Is that, can we apply for a dredge permit to just pump that, from here to here? Or is that an Army Corps, or how's that?
Yeah, so the answer is we could apply to make that realign that channel. That is a process that's done. It's done frequently between Seabrook and Kiowa. It's about a 1.5-year process to apply, and apparently that naturally happens about every 3 years. So you're kind of trying to plan a project when it's naturally doing it, it almost as quickly as you can get permission to do it. So when you get permission, it probably has naturally done it. That's a channel realignment. And so that the timing on that is very tricky, and you're faced with if you get the permit and you waited another few months, it would just naturally do it. So it's not seen as a great use of money.
Are those permits like the marina dredge? Are they like 10 years long and we could apply and sit on?
I think they're 5.
You can get an extension for 5
5, okay, so
The kind of
administratively it could be.
what we think would be beneficial is that spit of sand that starts stretching into the inlet could be transported via a shoal management project. And we have talked about the need for a shoal management project on the north end of the island and the potential for coupling a second project to go after that spit. That would be an easier project, you can just plan that project a little bit easier and better.
Would that be something we would consider in conjunction with Sullivan's? Because I feel like they might be having some challenges from that pot of sand right there too.
Well, and that would be the challenge is theoretically, when we're taking sand from that spit, we're probably delaying that sand getting to Sullivan. So we would need to coordinate with them, certainly.
Got it.
So, and that is on our kind of drawing board of future projects, is managing that spit and having permission to manage that spit when certain triggers
Right.
are met. The other, kind of even longer range solution would be an offshore dredge, exactly like we do on the northern end of the island, but it's a major kind of $10 to $20 million project. So that's a much bigger deal, but it also gives you significantly more sand when you do it.
Desiree, you have what you need to get started on the committee?
Yes.
Next item is public services. Item 1 is discussion of parking management proposals. This has been going for a year-ish, give or take. We had it down to 2 finalists. Desiree has a financial sheet that we'll take a look at from a total cost standpoint.
Yes, and I'll share this with you via email so you can take a look at it before now in the council meeting. As the mayor indicated, when we calculated the scoring from the presentations, we had the top 2 firms were Municipal PCI and as the number 1 vendor, and Pivot Parking was the second one. So we have, between that decision of council and during the holidays, we worked on trying to identify total cost for what would be the contract. We're looking at a 3-year contract with a parking management firm. And we've calculated what the net income to the city and then potential loss or what we are calling the cost of outsourcing. Please note that there's a lot of costs that we are incurring today that are not that are not going away. Staffing, in the police department, clerical court. I mean, there's a lot of time and effort that is taken to manage parking. So when you look at the city's operating expenses, they're low. They're lower than what they truly are because of all the other effort that takes to manage parking that, we're gonna continue to still to pay. But anyway, based on this analysis, we're looking at municipal PCI's offer or proposal being the one that is most favorable to the city. I think it aligns with a lot of the feedback we heard from council from the presentations and the review of their proposal as seeming like a very full offering for what we are looking for. This company focuses on managing parking in municipalities only, so fully understands the dynamic of a municipality who owns parking and manages parking from a livability perspective, not necessarily just as a revenue generator for the community. And the feedback that we've gotten from folks that use them has been pretty stellar. So the goal would be for council to review this. I know we have 2 new members. I need to share with you, Elizabeth, Councilmember Campson,
It still works.
the comparison and the analysis of all the different proposals and the scoring from council, and hopefully get somebody in place as soon as possible so that we can begin the transition and be ready at the beginning of the season.
And Desiree, this would be you're looking for a vote at the 23rd meeting.
So council will have to approve the contract
Right.
with, between the city and the vendor. Our next step is to start drafting a contract with our legal team.
So that may not be ready by
Correct.
then.
But the terms would be the same terms that were included in the proposal.
So you're looking for our support at the meeting to go forward with
Yes,
with
and
that
just
contract
hear,
with
yeah,
PCI?
internally get feedback if this direction aligns with the direction from council based on the presentations.
And I guess Elizabeth and Ashley probably have not seen.
I shared it with
Ashley
Ashley.
has-
She
okay.
requested it, and it reminded
Okay.
me, I do need to share it
Yeah,
with
so the
Elizabeth.
scoring and the RFPs and.
Yes, ma'am.
yeah,
Yes,
And
sir.
you can certainly watch the presentations if need be. Okay.
I have one little question, although it might be answered in the paperwork that you sent me. For this pivot parking, when it says revenue assumes an annual increase of 10%, they're assuming that we're gonna raise our rates annually, or
More
we're not
tickets.
getting more
No.
spaces?
Same spaces, same rates, same fees down at Front Beach. I think that just a more focused effort at enforcing and having a lot more
I think
presence.
they can capture
That-
more than.
And I think historically, we actually saw that from every firm, that when they have come in and taken over a parking operation, they see between 10 and 20% of increase.
Okay.
We are assuming just 10%. Try to be conservative, but we do think that, they'll be,
there.
right now, our folks are focused on parking and 100 different things. So having somebody just focus on parking should yield a more efficient operation.
Got it.
So again, Desiree, you're looking for us to take this away, do some analysis of our own, and then come on the 23rd with some directional for the staff.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that fair?
And this is, they'd be able to start up as pretty much as soon as we get them signed up, right?
Within 30, 45 days, I think they would be up and running.
Definitely for the season, obviously.
All right, and you're going to be available to walk individuals through this?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Desiree
You're
and staff
welcome.
for putting that together. Next item, discussion of cost of extending drainage pipe on 41st Avenue ditch from the end of the road to the head wall on the intercoastal. You recall this project, I guess Douglas is kicking off this week, or kicked off this week. Equipment's on site, pipes are on site. So the current project has piped 41st from Waterway Boulevard to about where the dumpsters are for the restaurant. This change order would take that piping, and again, these are 3 4-foot pipes, parallel running from where it ends currently all the way out to the intercoastal waterway. This Douglas or Desiree can talk about effectiveness of open ditch versus, a triple pipe. but this piece is in your packet as well, if you don't have it.
So, and I apologize, I typically try to avoid handing out handouts at the meeting, but this came out today. So I'm just, I want you all to have everything I have. And this is different than in your packet because they have, yeah, there are two
It's a
pieces of,
stapled piece and a non-stapled. You want to keep one of each.
just pass the whole packet you get.
Got it.
It's the difference between what you're seeing now and what you have in your packet. The change order amount in the packet is 94,000, and they've given us a credit for work that's included. For work, that they're already under contract, so that went down about $20,000. So the actual cost of the change order of extending the pipe, it's $478,300, and they're not charging us any, I think everybody has one.
Yeah, we're good.
They're not charging us any mobilization or demobilization. There's a lot of credits that are already involved. The Public Services and Facilities Committee met this morning, and they made a recommendation contingent upon receiving a breakdown, a detailed breakdown of the cost, which that's the second sheet of paper that I provided that shows just the breakdown of where the 478,000 comes from. This amounts to about 18-20% of the total cost of the project, and we would be adding about 170 linear feet of pipe to the existing project.
And just a couple of things from a funding standpoint, you'll recall this entire project is currently bid is being covered by a grant, so $1.2 million, $1.4 million, I can't remember the exact number. We have about $600,000 to $700,000 rough numbers left over from our bond proceeds for the 3 outfall projects, so certainly have financial capacity to pay this. You know, to me, I would fully support this, along with the committee that looked at it this morning. You know, whether we wind up doing additional marina parking or extend the Waterway Boulevard multi-use path and dump it into our park or some combination thereof, I just think it would give the city some flexibility for future for whatever we might want to do with that particular property. So, questions or anybody from the committee this morning want to opine?
I mean, I think we were pretty unanimous that this is going to be beneficial. You know, we should be getting a new parking plan out there, but even if we don't pick, I think we're at option J right now. Even if we don't pick J, I think that we'll get one soon enough, and this will be a benefit to that. And then also, it's going to look better. It should be more efficient, effective. We will get more parking out of it, and now's the time to do it. I mean, if we don't do it now, it's, you know, it would be silly to think about going back there and doing it at a later date. So, yeah, I think it's definitely worth it.
So this is what's gonna keep the remainder of 41st from looking like basically a retaining pond in the ditch?
Yeah, from waterway to
Absolutely.
to the
Yeah.
to the water.
Because I mean,
the
it
water.
just sits, I mean, it just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It will be, I mean, whether or not we close this portion in, it's still gonna have the
benefit of the
flapper,
larger.
the non-flow flapper valve. So we won't be getting the incoming tidal. So, you know, we'll be addressing the drainage issues are being addressed whether or not we do this small portion. This is really more for use of the area and aesthetics is the way I see it.
I do think that from a maintenance perspective, having
And, yeah.
the entire ditch piped facilitates the cleaning, and then, you know, otherwise we would be having to clean one section one way and then, you know, that section very
And when
differently.
we say the entire ditch, again, we're only talking from Waterway Boulevard out.
That's correct. From the
Which
intersection.
should help the flow and the standing and
Yeah,
the
it's just
everything,
there.
and the use of Station 2.
But the whole ditch on 41 is going to be affected by this project. It's
In a positive
benefited,
way.
benefited.
Correct.
Jim?
Just to emphasize too, what we gain from this is not only attractiveness, but it's like, what, 25 or more spaces, which will be
42?
trailer parking as well
To be
as,
determined.
yeah.
Yeah, let's not get into those
Okay.
specifics at this point. I mean, again, it could be parking, it could be multi-use path extension to the green space, it could be anything. We're just
Yeah.
creating the flexibility at this point.
It'll just be
Okay.
a hard,
Hard
you know,
surface.
surface. It won't be a ditch.
Great.
So the city issued a bond a few years ago to pay for the outfall project, the 30th, 36th, and 41st. Of that, we're only paying for the 30th and the 36th Avenue outfall, so we have about $700,000 of bond proceeds left to be spent. We have a ton of drainage needs, but that could be the source of funding to cover this expense. And it's tied to the actual outfall project, which is what the bonds were issued for.
Good. Next item, 3, discussion of fiscal year 25 transportation sales tax annual allocation program and potential projects for funding. You may recall, we submit something every year as a kind of a wish list, if you will. Last year, or this current fiscal year, we were awarded 21st Avenue sidewalk will be paid for by this particular grant. So that hopefully will be happening sometime this year. So it's time again to submit a wish list, if you will. So I know, Desiree, you've had some conversations and such around.
Yes, our recommendation is that we submit the second project that we submitted last year that did not get any funding, and that is to extend the sidewalk that's on the Breach Inlet Bridge and connect it to 10th Avenue. Right now, there's a break in that area that there's no pedestrian infrastructure. That was one of the projects that was voted on last year. So I think resubmitting it this year, it's not a bad idea. At the staff level, we've talked about another option that I want to show you all, very high level. When we're looking at the J.C. Long Boulevard street, here you can see the sidewalk that essentially borders our public safety building, and on Pavilion Drive, it connects, on this end, it connects to Ocean Boulevard. On J.C. Long Boulevard, that sidewalk ends right here, right after the compactor. And as you can see, this area is used by parking by the businesses down at Front Beach. So we would like the ability to try to engineer it so that we can incorporate a sidewalk on this end while not eliminating parking, maybe shifting parking parallel or angled. We don't know yet. We haven't really looked at it further. But there is no pedestrian infrastructure from this end to the corner of Ocean Boulevard. And that seemed, it meets the goals of the TSD program. We see people walking on the road all the time, and there is enough right-of-way. There is enough right-of-way on J.C. Long Boulevard to do so. And again, trying to figure out how to, we would not want to have a net loss of parking spaces. So working with an engineer to see whether or not there's space available to do both. But that's just something that's, that we have noticed and gotten complaints about, and that's just an option.
And Desiree, just real quick, Jimmy, this particular grant program isn't in the millions of dollars, it's more in the few hundreds of thousands. That's why we picked kind of small chunks, like the 21st Avenue sidewalk for this
That is
year,
correct.
These couple of pieces. Jimmy?
How far along into the research of this project are you? The reason I ask is 8 years ago, I brought up this very same project, and the response I got was impossible. Can't do it. Because it is a very dangerous space there. If you're ever going down that street and people walking down from the Front Beach area to the Seabiscuit, they're in the street. And that's in the morning and in the afternoon. Same thing on the other side of the street. And then, of course, there's delivery trucks at all hours of the day there. But I looked at this extensively 8-10 years ago, and that came back and just told me, it might have been for your time. That was
The county,
no, I went through the city of Isle of Palms. And the response that I got back was that it's impossible, can't do it.
well, you know, all we
That sounds like
have,
Douglas to me. That's a whole nother,
I think it was Douglas.
that's a
Do you
fact.
remember what happened there, Douglas?
So I would say that the goal of not reducing parking is probably what makes it most challenging. There clearly is the right-of-way width there, but you've got a lot of parking spaces crammed in there, so I don't know that it could be done without some reduction on the on-street parking.
Are they crammed in there under our, I mean, is that just where people happen to park, or is that like managed beach, beach management parking, local comprehensive beach management parking?
those are
numbers?
not counted as spaces, and, you know, you can just look and see, depends on how people park, but about 7 spaces.
It gives you the appearance, the size on the building is that the appearance from just a typical visitor is that is private parking, but it's not.
It's not, yeah, you can see the property, I mean, it's right under or right at the edge of the building.
Instead of trying to solve this tonight, I think you're just looking for, are these 2 projects ones we would like to submit for this particular grant?
And if we do, they have, just like 21st Avenue,
Yeah.
they assign county engineers to draw it up,
Oh, okay. And
design
manage the
it.
project.
Yeah, and they manage it, they design it, and then they bid it out and have it constructed. So this will need a vote of council at the 23rd meeting, so I will put those 2 projects as potential projects. If you all think of anything else between now and then, please let us know.
Is there enough money to do both of those in this, or would it be one or the other, you think? Or
It
is
depends, but it's very unlikely that they'll grant 2 projects for the same municipality. This is a program that every municipality in the county submits for.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to suggest bundle it up as one project submission with both locations.
That would be very creative. We can try, but
They're both sidewalks.
yes.
Yeah, fair. I guess last year when we got the 21st, or this year, 21st sidewalk, that's one of the first we've gotten in a bit.
We tried for 2 last year.
Yeah.
We tried for 2 last year. We did, the sidewalk on 28th Avenue was funded by this program, and also the connection of the multi-use path on the connector, tying it to the Leola Park on the
That's
corner.
right.
That was
Yeah.
also funded by that project, by that program.
Okay. Thank you, Desiree.
You're welcome.
Deborah, next item, financial review. In your package, you've got financial statements. We're going to have a discussion around the use of our tourism funds currently, and a look at the fiscal '25 budget calendar. It's time.
Good evening. I want to first discuss the revenues for all funds. We are 36%, have collected 36% of the budget for FY '24. All the revenues are performing very well, especially the marina. We have collected a little bit more than we anticipated due to excess lease payments from the marina restaurant. Based on their lease agreement, once they meet a certain amount, then they pay an additional rent, and that was substantial for December. All the expenses, we're kind of tracking at 42% for all funds, and our target is 50%. Please note that the beach preservation that Desiree have already discussed is showing that we're over budget, but because those funds were not approved in the budget, but they were approved by council after the budget was approved. So that's going to continue to show that we are spending more than we actually budgeted. The general fund is 27% of revenues that we've collected compared to the budget.
this is a little bit less than where we were last year. And that's, again, mostly due to the business licenses and business permits that were already discussed. We're just not getting those revenues that we anticipated. We did say that we were gonna budget less, and we did budget less, but they're coming in much lower than we anticipated. Property taxes are starting to come in, and, you know, the deadline for those is this month, so we should continue to see revenues flowing in for property taxes. We're already 5% above where we were last year. And our other licenses are doing well at 79% more than where we were the previous year. And those are revenues from, like, the state gives us revenue for other insurance companies. We get a portion of that, and other fees that the state gives us. Our expenses for the general fund are 49% of our 50% target. Most departments are tracking right at the 50%. Again, BSOs will continue to track higher than previous year due to the staffing changes that we made in that department. And we can go deeper into any of these departments that you would like to discuss. For our cash position, we have $41.5 million in our cash balances, which 21% of that is restricted. And those funds are, of course, our tourism funds, the beach preservation funds, and then some of the smaller funds are also restricted. We did receive a grant from FEMA for our firefighters, and that was $43,000. That came in December. And the interest rate for the LGIP account has dropped a little bit to 5.6755 from 5.6798. There any questions? Yes, sir.
One question, Deborah. The cash balance, the money that was approved for the bump in pay for city employees, that's reflected in the cash balance, right? That December 31st? Is that when that was made? Or that made in January?
It'll be made this month.
Okay.
We're gonna move on to our tourism revenue. The first one in your packet is the muni accommodation fee. And of course, those are accommodation taxes that visitors pay to us. And we're tracking at 10% higher than we were last year this time. For our state accommodation tax, this is paid quarterly, and we've only received one quarter payment thus far, and that's 4% less than where we were last year. For our county aid tax, we're 26% higher than we were last year this time, and this is also a quarterly payment. For hospitality tax, we're tracking 12% higher than we were previous year. And however, November is a little bit lower than we were November of FY23. For beach preservation, it's the same, it's kind of the same funds that we received from Muni A, and it's also 10% higher than we were last year. For our local option tax, we're at 3% higher from the four months that were collected already, which is just slightly higher than we were last year. Are there any questions regarding the accommodation tax? Any other hospitality taxes? And as Desiree said, regarding the drainage project, we've spent about well, we have left on the contract about $673,000 that we have not spent, $675,000 that we have not spent from what was contracted. And 790 of that we can apply from the bonds proceeds that's still left to be applied to smaller drainage projects that we may have.
Deborah, when do you expect to get the state aid tax funds for September through November? The next payment?
Those are normally 2 months, 2 months behind
So
at collections. So
so we
that,
should be getting those this month?
we should, because the quarter end in December, and we're, no, maybe
Probably
not
get it
this
February.
month.
February.
Yeah, probably February,
Right.
yeah,
Well,
because they're
Marty's
normally
always
about 2
behind.
months, yeah.
They hold on to it, get that interest.
Because it's important to kind of get a trend there that we're behind last year. I think it's important to start to understand where we're going to end up with that.
Right.
It's a big number. Yeah.
It's always been that way.
How consistent are they in paying?
It's the same.
Next item, Deborah, just stay right there. We've
Yes,
had
sir.
a fair amount of conversation, and we will have more when we get to the budget workshop, just around the use of our tourism funds for some of our staff, some of our projects. Desiree had responded to someone recently with a pretty good outline of where we use muni A-tax or state A-tax, whichever one. Do you mind just kind of running through that a little bit and make sure we're all level set before we get to budget workshop? Because we've talked about being a little more aggressive using our tourism funds for some of our city expenses. So Desiree, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I think we all know that the city is one of the lowest property tax rate in the county, and I think it's mostly due to the fact that we are able to leverage tourism dollars to support a lot of the operational expenses that the city has that are significantly impacted by tourism. And the mayor asked me to give you all a breakdown of what those are. The municipal accommodation tax, it's a 1% that the city collects on all accommodations on the city, in heads and beds, overnight accommodations in the city. We cover currently 3 firefighters and 2 police officers. And I can send you this, so, you know, I'm gonna say a lot of numbers. Hospitality tax, we cover 1 firefighter, 1 police livability and special services officer, and 1 police officer for a total of $281,000. And the state accommodation tax covers a portion, almost half of the cost of the PR and tourism coordinator position, 2 firefighters, 3 paramedics, and 1 police officer. When you look at our budget, you can see that not only tourism dollars not only support operational from a personnel perspective, but a lot of projects and ongoing operations, events, the contract, for example, the beach garbage contract that's fully paid for by tourism dollars, the front beach restroom, the maintenance, all of that is paid by tourism dollars. We had a conversation late last year about the city being more aggressive at using tourism dollars to cover for positions. We have talked about, right now, the tourism funds cover about 22% of our fire department personnel. I think we would be comfortable moving that up to about 25%, maybe even 30%. Tourism funds cover about 17% of personnel costs in the police department. That is another opportunity there for us to leverage those tourism dollars. And potentially add positions that have not been funded by tourism dollars that I think are well justified to do so. For example, the short-term rental coordinator position, it's going to be fully dedicated to managing our short-term rental program. Public Works, tourism funds cover 100% of the temp workers that we hire every day to assist with garbage collection. I think we can make a justification to cover at least 2 CDL positions using tourism dollars. So one of our assumptions when we're building the budget will be to try to maximize the use of tourism dollars. I have been very conservative. I mean, I like budgeting conservatively, and I understand that tourism dollars can be, as we have seen, can be impacted, obviously, by the economy and by other events that would happen. So we have been using a very conservative budgeting strategy so that we are able to cover a lot of these costs in the event that tourism revenues are not performing as they should. But we have seen the city be very resilient over time with tourism activity. So I think there is enough wiggle room there to allow us to maximize them more than we have in the past. But we do use tourism dollars for a lot of projects, specific projects, events, and a lot of our ongoing day-to-day operations, including personnel. Is that what you wanted me to do?
It is, this is captured in an email, so we'll send that out after this meeting, just so you can kind of have a level set before we start getting to budget conversations. I mean, I think, to Desiree's point, I think we've been very conservative. You certainly don't want to turn the dial too far the other way and rely on tourism dollars too much. But I do think we have some room to use that some more, just to make better use of it personally. Jan?
Yeah, I believe in our reports earlier on for the police and fire, I think it's the fire, non-resident calls 66, resident calls 57 for the month. So it looks like you could go up to almost 50% of our staff paid for by tourism.
And I personally am not comfortable at all going to that level.
Right, but we're at 20-something now.
Right.
you know.
Get Scott, and then come back to you.
Yeah, I think when we get to the budget discussion too, it'd be helpful, I know from even myself, when we refer to tourism funds, what we're including, what categories we're including in those. Is it H tax, is it A tax? I mean, which ones are we including in those buckets? Because
So the
when
ones I listed is the municipal accommodation tax, the hospitality tax, which is tax on food and bev, and the state accommodation tax.
Okay, just
The
those
other-
three buckets.
Those
Yeah.
three. The other is the beach preservation. Those are restricted funds, so they're not included in what we use to cover operational expenses.
Okay, so, and when we're talking about funding, are we funding out of the current revenues? Are we funding out of the revenues that are left over after they're allocated across the departments? And this isn't for this discussion, but I think a good walkthrough of how those funds are making it from one fund to the other to actually fund those people in those departments, I think are gonna be very helpful. I'm coming up with a little bit different on the numbers on the allocations here, so.
Yeah, I'm looking, when you look at the transfers in.
Yeah.
The transfers in from each of those funds into the general fund is what covers those positions.
Yeah,
But-
and I think this budget year, we moved about we've transferred in and out like $4.7 million around. I think it would be helpful for us to see kind of how that traverses back and forth.
Yeah, we can do that in the workshop. Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy?
I think the philosophy that the city has taken as being conservative is the correct one. I am in favor of moving up to about 30%. The problem is if you go by just raw numbers and pick, like, say, it's 50% of the activity, that's much too simplistic of a approach, because what you're doing is you're taking potential variable revenues and funding fixed expenses.
Yeah.
So as tourism funds, it comes from accommodations. We have a major storm and we lose a lot of revenues from tourism funds that were not here during Hugo. And then we've still got this fixed cost that we have to carry without the variable revenues. And that's why I'm not in favor of going up to, like, I think 30 is a good number, but not 50.
Elizabeth?
I've advocated for a long time, unsuccessfully, for the creation of a beach renourishment fund with leftover money, because we can hold that longer than the 2 years if we have a dedicated fund. And since we're talking about trying to figure out how to pay for beach renourishment, I would like to see and understand, what that could possibly mean. I mean, what is, effectively left over at the end of this rolling kind of 2-year period, and what might we be able to sock away? even if it's not a consistent number. But if, you know, I mean, we've gone around with our disaster recovery fund too. I mean, even if we're even just a little bit could help. $300,000 worth of sandbags or something, you know, just.
Mayor, Scott.
Yes, sorry.
I didn't know if Jan had something. Okay, yeah, one last point. I think I agree with both of you as well. I think by turning up the lever on relying more on variable revenues to cover fixed expenses, I'm not sure that's the trend we want to get into. And I think one last thing is when we continue to talk about allocating more of these ATAX funds to cover fixed expenses, that means we have less money. It's a fixed bucket. We're really just moving that money around and not going to be able to spend money on any other projects. So the more we rely on covering fixed expense with variable revenues, the less we're going to be able to do for infrastructure. Yeah.
Our fund balance in those tourism funds, you can see they're going up, you know, they're growing significantly year over year. And I think that is what would yield an opportunity to maybe tap into it a little bit more. But I want to still be very conservative just because of the.
Or to even do something like Elizabeth's saying.
That's right.
And reclassify that money.
Can we brainstorm for new revenue sources during that budget cycle?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Brain right, maybe?
Brain right.
I just like to say that I just look at as a rule of thumb, if 50% of our calls for service of the police and fire
That's 1 month.
Are
We can't be making.
non-residents,
decisions.
yes, then we are being conservative in 2025 or so. So that's fine with me. I'm not saying we need to be 50%. The other thing to remember, though, is if tourism goes down, then our need for service will go down as well with that. So I think we're being very conservative where we are, but I don't want to be so conservative that we're not doing what we need to do to serve our community either. So that's where I'm coming from.
So next item is review of fiscal '25 budget calendar to this whole conversation. Desiree, do you have this?
I
You want
do.
to put
Give
up
me
or?
1 second.
Okay.
Can you believe we're talking budget again?
I know.
So quick.
And fiscal '25.
I didn't do that. That was not my fault.
No, I took it out. Amy, do you want to give me? There you go.
Got it.
Thank you. So this is the same calendar we've used for the past couple of years. Just want to give you an opportunity to react to it and want me to make it bigger?
Oh, thank you.
So we'll start this, we'll start this month with a review of the 10-year capital plan and a conversation about assumptions with the city council. We'll do that at the council meeting later this month. Our goal is to prepare and present the 10-year capital plans to the standing committees next month, as well as review our internal planning tools, 5-year projection of revenue and expenditure and how they're going to be impacting fund balance, and do that at the next workshop. And at the same time, have council identify budget priorities. I think a lot of the conversation at the retreat could help guide what the city wants to focus on this year. That's not already in our 10-year capital plan, it already planned for. March, we'll have standing committees review departmental operational budgets. So we always start with capital, then we go to operational, a little bit more detailed in each department, essentially keeping lights on. That's how I call this. There's not a whole lot of discretionary funding there, but we always find opportunities, and we'd like to discuss those with the committees that month. We'll have a budget workshop. We've had one or two budget workshops, I think maybe 3 years ago, and with the workshop structure, City Council still discussed a lot of the budgeting pieces at the workshop. Mayor and I felt like having one in March was okay. Certainly we can pivot and have another one. And then our goal would be to have the final draft of the budget presented for a first reading of an ordinance, second reading and the public hearing in May. We have to have a budget ratified by the end of June, so we'd like to give ourselves at least a month of buffer time. We've met it for the past 2 years, so I think we should.
Meet it every year.
No, when the.
Sometimes in June.
Sometimes we've
A lot of times in-
ratified it in June. And this is the first, we have, this is gonna be Deborah's
Never a
first
deficit.
budget process, so we are taking it, kind of
Deborah.
bite-sized pieces. Bite-sized pieces so that it's manageable. And I'm very much involved, as well, so it's gonna be taking a lot of more of the time that, I don't know where I'll find it, but I'll find it.
What else on workshop or budget or calendar at this point?
I think
Thank
that's
you.
it.
I think that's
Anything else?
it.
All right. Desiree, capital projects update. You've got a spreadsheet in your packet. We'll just hit the highlights, kind of what's happening currently. Projects in motion. Deborah, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. So, for the benefit of time, I won't go into each one unless there's any specific questions. I do want Douglas to give you a little bit more detail around the emergency beach restoration work that is currently happening. He's much closer to me. He talks to the contractor and every day. So I want him to give you kind of where we are today and maybe touch on drainage as well. That's an active project that we have going on. Talked a little bit about it when we talked about 41st and that change order, but if that's okay, I can go through each one or kind of.
Rock on.
Okay.
And I think we've touched on a lot of this when we talked about the beach earlier, but in kind of at a very high level, the dune was pretty well wiped away entirely by that mid-December meeting. They came back, did some emergency work, and took off for the Christmas holiday, remobilized January 2nd. I would say had the majority of that berm back in place for the event Tuesday. And unfortunately, Tuesday took probably about half of it again. So they were out there that night. They've been out there ever since. They are probably a day or two from having the breach inlet end berm back to the condition that it was prior to mid-December storm. We are then on that end of the island going to be in a mode of analyzing the profile of the beach, seeing what needs there are to make it to that Army Corps project. We do still have money available, and we would potentially at that point have time available to truck in sand if that's deemed to be the appropriate thing. But I think we should be in reasonably good shape down there by probably the beginning of next week.
Are you taking into account the storm we're getting tomorrow?
So we're here, yes, we are, we're watching it, we're hearing that we're not expecting it to be, it should be a lower impact than Tuesday's storm. But to your point, we're now talking about which day of the week storm you're talking about. So it seems as though you just kind of can't keep ahead of them.
The storm shouldn't be nearly.
Yeah, that's
Way
our
wide, at
thing. But
least.
then I think there's also one on the heels of that that's going to be like Tuesday. So every day, every week's a vacation. So that's kind of breach inlet in a nutshell. On the Beechwood East end, as Desiree mentioned earlier, they began installing those bags today. The coastal engineer and the bag manufacturer wanted to see kind of the model of how they're starting with that process. Be sure they get it correct from the start and then continue along in a method that everybody's happy with. So they're not going to really restart that effort in earnest until next Monday. So the bag manufacturer and CSE representatives and the contractor will be on site. We'll be there on Monday morning. It is actually Monday. So you're going to have to work on Martin Luther King Day. So that'll happen on Martin Luther King Day. That should, once they begin, they're estimating about a week and a half to install those bags. And then that end should be also pretty well in order for the short term.
So Douglas, just for clarity, they start installing today?
Correct.
And will continue for the week?
They're gonna
Or
hold
hold
until
until
Monday.
Monday.
Correct. They have this section set up, but that was the earliest that the bag manufacturer and Stephen could get
Could come
together
together.
on
Yeah.
site to be sure that they do it
Very
correctly from here on.
Anxious to see these new bags and how they
They are
perform.
interesting. They're definitely different.
Yeah.
Two layer, and they are unique. I've
Yeah.
never quite seen anything like that. To just kind of hit highlights of any questions about beach, or go to the drainage project?
I've got one. Can you just comment on, can you just comment on some of the concerns we've been hearing around scraping versus bringing in new sand?
Yes.
And the belief that we're scrape, we wash it, the sand washes out, we scrape, so we're just continually digging out the beach, allowing the water now to come further up landward. And that even now, it's the water at high tide is all the way up to the new dunes that we built. And there's this, as you know, there's this belief that we're continuing to make it worse by the more scraping we're doing, is just further creating a problem.
Yeah, and I think that by all accounts, scraping is seen as a very short-term solution. No beach management plan is based on long-term arrangement of scraping. We do it in events like we've had here, where we get an erosional episode, we leave houses unprotected, or houses are unprotected. We can very quickly, in a matter of a few days, scrape a berm up, and that will serve as a layer of protection. In fact, the Tuesday storm was an excellent example where those houses were unprotected 10 days prior. The contractor mobilized, was able to get something in place. That dune stopped. It went about halfway through that dune, but it stopped the water from going past the dune. If that dune hadn't been there, it would have been up and under the houses. So that really is the perfect kind of illustration of what the purpose is behind the scraping. By all accounts, a better kind of long-range solution is bringing in sand, either by, bringing it from offshore or trucking it in, but bringing in sand and adding sand to the system is always going to be better for managing the beach. Unfortunately, it's a very slow process. All of the sand has to be brought from a mine to a transport spot. In our situation, our only transport spot is the breach inlet parking lot, which is a pretty congested, small site when you have multiple dump trucks, excavator, and then road dump trucks meeting there. So you couldn't have kind of 20 trucks doing a transfer at once. So that lends itself to a fairly slow, you're trying to get this sand through a fairly small straw, if you think about it. And then you add the tide cycle window that they can do that on top of that, and it's even slower. So that's the drawback of trucking. The other drawback is the cost per truckload of sand is 4 or 5 times the expense. So if we had only trucked in sand, we probably would have gone through, the entire beach fund that we saved. So there's some drawbacks to it, but it is the better kind of longer range management style. But in this situation, we have the luxury of having what we're hoping is a fairly good solution right on the horizon. So we very much have had our intention of getting to that finish line and then feeling like the Army Corps project would provide longer-term relief. So in a nutshell, scraping is good short-term. We don't want to be doing it for extended months, years on end. And you were correct that we received some emails about please stop scraping. The city send out a correspondence explaining what I've just explained and said, please let us know if you don't want us to scrape. And the feedback was resoundingly positive please scrape, you know, don't leave us exposed, please scrape. So we felt like we were, you know, we reacted to some of that feedback we got.
Well, and Douglas, I think, yeah, you mentioned it quickly, but our contractor, I mean, has been here, not 24/7, but pretty darn close, post-storm and.
Yeah,
I
he
think
was
it-
in the storm.
Yeah,
I mean, there till midnight.
yeah.
If anything, need them to go take a break occasionally, get
Yeah.
some rest, and be sure they're good. But
But he's been a
they've
good
done a tremendous,
contractor. Yeah.
tremendous job, absolutely. Ready to move to drainage quickly?
Well, no, you addressed it. What I was wondering is the scraping is clearly just a very temporary emergent situation, but the trucking that the residents have expressed a concern that perhaps we're not doing enough of, if any, is more of a midterm. It's
That's
not,
correct.
it's a better solution, but it isn't in an emergency situation necessarily always something that we can
That's
do
correct. And
quickly.
that's
Is that
exactly
the-
right,
okay.
exactly right.
Too, the challenge is, you know, when we did scraping right after the August storm, we did that, and then between that and the other, the astronomical king tides that we had a trucking operation where we were supplementing sand that was scraped with new sand. Then the king tides happened. We had a handful of properties that, you know, were completely exposed. Go back to scraping again, based on, you know, kind of what Douglas explained, quick. Then the December 17th storm happened, and then, 2 days ago happened. So it is not part of our long-term strategy. It's just that we have had emergency after an emergency that continues to leave a lot of these areas exposed, and we have limited options.
Everybody good?
Yeah.
Drainage projects, they are, QE is the contractor doing 36th Avenue. They're back on site this week. They've been getting that site prepared for the installation and construction of large boxes on the inland side of Waterway Boulevard. The storm did cause some damage to their project there that they're also trying to make up time. They're also trying to manage an extremely high water table. Water table is kind of right under the ground, and they have to have, and it's pretty amazing to see it. If you can peer your head into Waterway Boulevard, you look over into what's usually a ditch, and right now it's about a 15-foot completely dry hole. So that's all dewatering where they've got well points and they're pulling that water out. It's not unlike anything you'll really ever see. You look down a huge hole and it's bone dry. So they've probably been delayed another 2 weeks by the storm and then managing the water problem that they've had, but they're making good progress now. 41st Avenue, they have mobilized. Pipes are on the site. We do now have an executed agreement with the restaurant that is going to give us the ability for our contractors to use half of that employee lot. We received that today or yesterday. So that was good news. So they've been standing by a little bit waiting for that. They've also had some soil tests done this week that didn't come back as favorable as they expected. There's a little more soft material in those ditches than they anticipated, so there's going to be a modification to the design of the box necessary for that, which is going to impact their timeline of installing that box by a couple of weeks. So really, I think we're thinking now, beginning of February, they will be hard at work at that corner site. That'll also give you all time to make a decision on the extension of those pipes. So that's obviously in the very beginning part of their work as well. They'll be working from the intracoastal waterway towards Waterway Boulevard. But they're on site, they're working, and they've also been pleasure to work with, that group. That's all I have unless there's questions.
Any other project updates you want to,
Oh, gosh.
I mean, we could read, I mean, if there's anything.
No, I mean, I
Often.
think the sheet in the packet sort of gives an update of where we are. A lot of projects that are underway. City Hall will have a little bit more next month. The fitness courts at the rec got complete. Dog parks are in process.
I have a quick question on that. Have the EMS calls gone up since that got put in place?
I don't think any council members have been out there doing anything.
Oh, I do, thank you, Douglas. I do want to highlight, one of the projects we had scheduled for this year that we budgeted about $200,000 for is the new entrance or a separated entrance for emergency access by the county park. Council approved the final design about December of last year, November, December last year. The county and the engineer, or the designer, are still going back and forth on details. And the county had given us a deadline of end of February for the construction to be completed. They certainly don't want that happening anywhere near close the season, which we understand. But based on the fact that they have not yet finalized the design, that project has to go out for bid. We have to find a contractor, and it has to be constructed. It is very likely, I would say 99% sure, that project will have to be punted until FY '25. We'll continue working on it, and we'll have, as soon as we have a final design, we'll go out for bid, select the contractor, and then we just issue a notice to proceed as of a date that we get from the county. It's either that or hoping that the county will extend their deadline, but as we know, construction, I would not want to have any delays in the middle of the season. So I think we are realistically just looking at the end of this year for that project to start, which is a shame, but we'll continue working on it. So that's really the only big change that I wanted to note. And Douglas mentioned this temporary license agreement between the city and the restaurant for the use of the employee lot temporarily during construction. That agreement, I thought I had included it in the workshop. I didn't, but it is in the Public Services and Facilities Committee meeting packet for your review. It's just a 2-month agreement, and the city would be granting rent abatement for the cost of those parking spaces in the employee lot, which is about $1,000, $1,200 a month. It's our project, and we need access. So there's an agreement there for those accommodations to be made.
And that's been agreed to by the restaurant.
The restaurant has agreed to, so it's just up to the city to agree, and it is within the threshold of what the city administrator can approve. That was drafted by our attorney, so we feel comfortable in moving forward with that.
Thank you. Final questions, comments? There being no further business?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Off record at 7:00.